I'm definitely one of those players who is excited to play Starfield. I honestly cannot wait until the release. But with that said, I know that this is not a perfect game and there's definitely some major issues. And in today's video, we're going to be going through 10 of them. And number one, we got to talk about the 30 FPS. We'll go through this quick and keep it brief because most people already know that this is an issue. The choice that Bethesda made for players to see the beauty of this game and to get the most out of it, they've locked it at 30 FPS. And then they bring up this comment saying that they're doing it for the players because they want players to experience Starfield at its fullest. But really, players experiencing any game at their fullest really should come down to the player. Whether that is experience this game at its fullest at 60 FPS with lower graphic settings, or in the way in which they intend players to see it, which is 30 FPS and then higher graphic settings. The fact that they've given no players a choice on this also means that they've probably done other things in a similar way. And number two, combat. Combat doesn't necessarily look bad, but it also doesn't really look great. And especially going off that previous point of 30 FPS, it's not going to be the smoothest in the most action-packed gameplay experiences. But looking beyond just the 30 FPS, in general, enemy animations as well as the AI just doesn't really look like it belongs there. It looks like it's a good foundation, but in some situations when you're using a jetpack to jump, there's not really many enemies that are able to comprehend that you're up in the sky and actually able to shoot at you, making it already appear like there's an overpowered way in which you can fight. The second that you get this skill and ability, you're able to just always jump up, always completely confuse the AI, never get hit, and be on your way. If it does become that easy for combat, it means that the difficulty factor in this game is going to be reduced massively. Now this is just one example, there's actually loads of examples where the AI just does not feel like it's quick enough. It's too busy shooting at a previous last known location rather than it actually shooting at you. And of course, there needs to be balance to this. You don't want enemies to always be able to pinpoint exactly where you are. But right now, it does look quite slow. Speaking of slow, we also need to talk a bit more about gameplay. It does appear to be a walking simulator. There's actually a lot of times in which Bethesda, and including Todd Howard, who described this game, and they more or less described a walking simulator. Being able to travel to a planet, not having anything to do, but just walking and then seeing a spaceship. They even emphasize that there's not much to do, but there's a spaceship. And that, although it may be fine for the first time, but after you experience this several times, it's nothing special. We've still got a walking simulator where you'll need to walk around a planet and occasionally see a few things off in a distance, but not anything to actually do. What makes this even worse is point number 4, where there is no land vehicles or mounts. And we have no idea whether or not Bethesda aim to add any of this within a future with a future update. We know that the first update is called Shattered Space, but we don't know what that's going to involve. And we won't know until we get closer to the release or even after the release. But the fact that there's no land vehicles and there's no mounts from day one is a massive issue. It emphasizes that this game is more or less a walking simulator, or at the very least will be for a good amount of planets. And number 5, we need to highlight that even though this is a space game and it's advertised that you can visit any planet, which appears to be true, you don't actually get to land on the planets. You see it in the cutscenes, but it's not actually controlled by you. The second that you get close enough to a planet and select your landing location, it will automatically go to that location. You'll see a cutscene and then it will transition. And that may not seem like much of an issue, but yet again, based on our previous points, it just highlights even more problems when it comes to exploring. Because if we're talking about this being a walking simulator, there are no land vehicles, there are no mounts. And if landing itself is automatic in that it will go into a cutscene, it does mean if you see something off in the distance on a particular planet, the only 2 ways in which you can travel to it. One is the slow, tedious way of walking to that area. The second way is fast traveling back to your spaceship, which we know is already a confirmed feature, for you to go through a cutscene to leave the planet, select the new location that you want to travel to, and then re-enter back in through another cutscene. You are not able to go to your spaceship and just fly over to the area that you want to go to, because the second that you enter your spaceship whilst on a planet and you prepare to take off, it will go into a cutscene of you taking off. And number 6, you probably already know that there's over 1,000 planets in this game. That is a pretty big number and is used heavily within advertising, but it has recently been confirmed that only 10% of these planets actually have life. And when we're talking about life, it does appear that there is only a few animals. We're not talking about life in terms of how many species there are on Earth, and they're trying to replicate that across every single planet that does contain life. There are only a couple of animals on each, just like there's only a couple plants on each, and also a couple resources on each. When you take that into consideration, yeah, it somewhat makes sense. It's not like life is frequent, especially in our solar system, so why would it be the case anywhere else? You need that Goldilocks zone, so in terms of it being immersive, yeah, this is understandable. But as you'll soon see, there's also not many other activities that can go on these various other planets. And from a gameplay point of view, it does mean that there's not really going to be too much to do. And that brings us to the next point. What is the incentive to exploring? The biggest advertisement so far, which has been the reason to explore, is because you're able to see cool things. But that's not enough, and we know it's not enough because that was what was advertised for No Man's Sky back in 2016. Players are buying into a game and not a movie because they actually want to participate within a gameplay experience. If it was just cool things to see, it could have just been a movie. And with some players that have already brought this up, there's also been other players arguing the point to explore that you'll need to find resources. But it's also been confirmed that you're going to be able to find just as many resources out in space by taking hold of other ships and then selling them on than if you were to go and visit a planet to go and gather resources. And you're able to go and do it a lot quicker and should hopefully be more entertaining. There will of course be a lot of players who will jump into this and just like to walk for the sake of walking, but yet again, history has told us many times this is only fun for so long. Give it a couple hours of doing this over and over again and most people will give up. Another problem that has already been raised is the stealth character animations. Now we touched on this briefly in terms of combat. It feels fairly slow, but it also shows it within dialogue. With the models themselves, they actually look really good. I'm actually impressed, especially in some situations with the lighting bouncing off the characters, and it does seem to be an improvement in my opinion from 2022 to 2023, but where this lacks is actually the animations. In a lot of cases, it's still straight armed, side by side talking. The head will move gradually, but there's no emphasis on certain words that are said, and it still lacks emotion in a lot of areas, giving a stealth character somewhat robotic dialogue system. With this, most players have acknowledged this, and they're also somewhat looking beyond it because there is a lot of dialogue options. So the character animations tend to be stealth, but it unlocks more gameplay in terms of replayability, and what choices you make will reflect on what you're able to do. And then yeah, most players are happy to look over this, but we can't deny that this is still an issue. Number 9, we need to highlight that the game is probably going to be fairly empty. We have talked about how only 10% of planets will actually have life, but I don't think you really understand what that means. Out of 1,000 planets, only 100 of those will have wildlife, and for there to be wildlife, these will also be the only planets that will have plants. That leaves over 900 planets left. What do they actually have? Because if there's no animals and there's no plants available, which we already know is going to be something that other civilizations are trying to scan, they're trying to gather resources, that there's not much of a reason to go anywhere else. So what happens on the other 900 planets? Is it the case of traveling just to one planet just to go through one dynamic event, or to find one collectible, or to go through one outpost? And unfortunately, it does appear that that's going to be the case. If Bethesda were not in a position to add more wildlife to each and every planet, so it's somewhat realistic, we're not talking thousands of species across each, but a bit more than 5, then what's the chances of them being able to spend time working on new artifacts, new collectibles, new outposts, new combat systems on a whole planet when there's over 900 of them? It certainly leaves the door open within the future for Bethesda to come back and actually create more content across the various planets, but why would you buy into that from day one? You might as well just wait in the future where Bethesda hopefully updates this game. And finally, at number 10, well, the point to be made and a massive problem is Bethesda, because it is Bethesda. We talked in our previous point how it does leave opportunity for them to create new updates, but there's no guarantee updates are going to be good or even frequent. There's other comments that have been made over the last year, and part of me wants to believe it, but also I'm still very skeptical. One of those being that Starfield is going to be the game which has the fewest amount of bugs that Bethesda have ever launched, which does sound like a pretty big claim, but also most of Bethesda's games are completely broken on release. It just sounds like a statement when you know the context, which comes down to it having relatively less bugs, but still being a fairly high number. Not to mention that, who knows? It's uncommon for QA to know every single gameplay issue and then have a list of every single problem and try and get them all fixed. Because if that was the case, then every single game would have that list and would be able to go and work through it before the game's release, fixing every single one of them. But the thing is, there are some things that simply cannot be tested in a game dev environment, but once you hand it to millions of players, they end up doing things that QA never thought of doing, and that multiplies how many issues that there could potentially be. So Bethesda making a statement like that, for me, it just sounds like BS. They're saying it in hopes that those that experienced them within their previous titles are hopefully going to be more hopeful with Starfield. But I warn you, even though Bethesda are making all of these promises, always be skeptical. And I guess that in itself shouldn't just be applied to Bethesda, but pretty much any game studio. If you enjoyed this video, then I highly recommend clicking our next video on screen. That one is a bit more positive as it goes through 9 reasons why you should be hyped to play Starfield. Click that and I'll be over there to guide you through absolutely everything.